Welcome back to your channel, Leo Storyland. Here we uncover real Reddit stories. If you liked my video, please like, share, subscribe.
My name is Florence and I'm 34 years old. I collapsed on the kitchen floor of my parents' house on a Tuesday morning in March, my vision tunneling into a pinpoint of light before everything went black. The last thing I remember was the sound of a ceramic mug shattering against the tile, and then nothing until I woke up in an ambulance with a paramedic shining a light into my eyes and asking me my name. My father, Gerald, had been the one to find me, and my mother, Eleanor, had called the ambulance. But by the time I was wheeled through the emergency room doors, they were already gone. I found out later from a nurse who thought I already knew that my father had looked at me lying on the floor, checked his watch, and said, "She fainted? She'll live. Our flight with your sister leaves at 6. My younger sister Wendy was getting married in Cancun that weekend, and my parents had a connecting flight out of the city that afternoon that they could not afford to miss. So they left me on the kitchen floor for the paramedics to find, gave a brief statement to the responding officer, and drove straight to the airport with my suitcase still packed for a trip I would never take, because I had been the one asked to house sit and water the plants while everyone else celebrated in the sun. The hospital admitted me with a diagnosis that terrified me more than the fainting spell itself: a severe cardiac arrhythmia combined with dangerously low blood pressure, likely triggered by a medication interaction nobody had caught. The doctors said if I had been alone in my apartment instead of my parents' house, I might not have been found in time. I spent that first night hooked up to monitors that beeped through the darkness, watching the doorway, certain that someone would walk through at any minute. Nobody did. I called my mother's cell phone twice before I gave up, understanding that whatever she was doing in Cancun mattered more than whatever was happening to my heart in that hospital bed. The days blurred together after that. I spent 9 days in that ward alone, watching other patients get visitors with balloons and flowers and homemade soup in Tupperware containers, while my own bedside table held nothing but a plastic cup of water and a call button I pressed less and less as the days went on. The nurses became my only company. There was one in particular, a woman named Dolores who ran the cardiac ward with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of family fail, every kind of patient, who started bringing me extra pudding cups from the cafeteria and sitting with me during her breaks. She never asked why nobody came. She just stayed, and in the strange, sterile loneliness of that room, her presence became the only thing that felt like family. On the 9th day, I heard voices in the hallway before I saw them, and my stomach dropped the way it used to when I was a child and knew I was about to be blamed for something I hadn't done. My parents strolled in with suitcases still tagged from the airport, tanned from the Caribbean sun, talking to the nurses at the front desk as though they were checking out of a hotel rather than checking on a daughter they had abandoned. My father didn't apologize. He didn't even sit down. He announced, loudly enough for the whole floor to hear, that they were here to sign the discharge papers and take me home, as if 9 days of silence could be erased with a single administrative act. That was when Dolores, the head nurse, stepped directly into the doorway of my room and blocked it with her body, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "She's not yours to discharge anymore," she said, and the words landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. My father's face shifted from irritation to confusion. My mother's mouth opened and closed without sound. I remember staring at Dolores, my heart monitor ticking faster on the screen beside me, wondering what on earth she meant, because as far as I knew, I was still their daughter, still bound to them by blood and by the paperwork every patient signs on the way into a hospital bed. Dolores didn't blink. She glanced down at a clipboard in her hand, then back up at my parents, and said the sentence that would unravel everything I thought I understood about my own admission, about the 9 days I had spent forgotten in that ward, about the family I had assumed still had any claim over what happened to me. "Ask the man who," she began, and then stopped herself, turning instead to look directly at me, as though she were waiting for my permission to say a name neither of us had spoken aloud in years, a name that was about to change everything I thought I knew about who had actually been taking care of me while my own family boarded a plane and left me for dead. Dolores looked at me for a long moment, as if giving me one last chance to stop her, and when I said nothing, only nodded, she turned back to my parents and finished her sentence. "Ask the man who's been calling this hospital every single day for the past 9 days asking about her condition. Ask the man who updated her emergency contact information the morning she was admitted. Ask the man whose name is now listed as her medical power of attorney." My mother's face went pale under her tan, and my father's jaw tightened the way it always did when he realized he'd walked into a situation he didn't control. I lay there in the bed, gripping the thin blanket, trying to possibly be talking about, because the only people who had ever been listed on my paperwork were the two people standing in that doorway looking like strangers to me for the first time in my life. The answer walked in less than a minute later, and it was not who I expected. It was Desmond, my downstairs neighbor of 6 years, a quiet, steady man who fixed my leaking faucet the first week I moved into my apartment and had been bringing me coffee every Sunday morning ever since, never asking for anything more than conversation on the stairwell. I hadn't even realized he knew I was in the hospital. It turned out that on the morning I collapsed, my phone had been in my coat pocket, and when the paramedics searched it for an emergency contact after my parents left the scene, they found his name saved under "in case of emergency," a line I had filled in years ago on a whim after a scary asthma attack, never imagining it would ever actually matter. Desmond told me later that he got the call while he was watering his own plants 2 floors below mine, and he had been at the hospital within the hour and had not stopped showing up since. My father demanded to know why a neighbor had any legal standing over his own daughter, his voice rising in the doorway until Dolores calmly informed him that hospital policy required a designated contact to be present and responsive for medical decisions, and that for 9 consecutive days, the number on file belonging to my parents had gone straight to voicemail, while Desmond had answered every single call, signed every consent form the doctors needed, and sat in the family waiting room more nights than he went home. Somewhere in that blur of fear and machines beeping through the dark, when the doctors needed someone to approve an emergency procedure to stabilize my heart rhythm, it had been Desmond's signature on the form, not my father's, because my father was 2,000 miles away toasting champagne at a rehearsal dinner. My mother tried to soften things, saying they came back as soon as the wedding was over, that they never meant for it to be 9 days, that they assumed I was fine because no one had called to say otherwise. I finally found my voice then, hoarse from disuse, and reminded her that I had called her twice from this very bed and she never picked up. She had no answer for that. My father muttered something about how families make sacrifices and how Wendy's wedding couldn't be rescheduled, and I realized in that moment that this wasn't a misunderstanding or an accident of timing. This was simply who they were and who they had always been, and I had spent 34 years excusing it as busyness or bad luck instead of naming it for what it was. Desmond stood quietly near the window through most of the confrontation, letting me handle my own parents, only stepping forward when my father tried to insist on taking me home himself. "She already has a ride arranged," Desmond said simply, and something about the calm certainty in his voice made my father back down in a way nothing else had. Dolores discharged me herself 2 hours later, and it was Desmond who wheeled me out to his car, Desmond who had already stocked my refrigerator with soup and set up a recliner by the window so I wouldn't have to climb the stairs to my bedroom right away, Desmond who had been quietly building a life raft under me for 6 years while my own family had been drifting further and further away without me even noticing. My parents flew home from that hospital parking lot with nothing resolved, and in the months since, I have not spoken to either of them. Not out of spite, but out of a clarity I had never let myself have before. I finally understood that love is not the people who share your blood. It is the people who show up when your heart is literally failing and stay until you're strong enough to stand again. Desmond and I are engaged now, and every time I look at that hospital bracelet I kept in my nightstand drawer, I remember exactly who chose me when it mattered most, and it was never the people I expected. If this story moved you, if you have ever had to learn the hard way who your real family is, hit that subscribe button right now. Because there are so many more stories like mine waiting to be told, and I promise you, they only get more powerful